Yeah, so this session is about the Cybersecurity, Privacy and Trust PhD program. So this is one of many PhD programs offered by the School of Informatics in the University of Edinburgh. And our program is run by the Cybersecurity, Privacy and Trust group within the School of Informatics. So we have one of the largest such groups in the UK, research groups working in cybersecurity topics. And I'm going to give you an introduction to the program, what it offers, talk a little bit about the application process, and then give a chance for questions. And then in the second half, talk a little bit about research areas. So as we're quite a large group, there are many different research areas, and I can't hope to cover them all. And we might also run out of time depending on how many questions there are in the first part. But I'll try to at least introduce some of the interesting research, past research that we've done, and some future ideas as well. Okay, so Cassia, have I got control? Yes,
on the top of your screen.
Thank
yes.
you. Yeah. Bottom of my screen. Yeah. So as I said, we're quite a large group in terms of the way these things are measured. It means we have about 20 staff who are teaching staff and academics, as well as about 30 postdocs and 25 PhDs in progress. That's out of a much larger body in the School of Informatics overall. So we also have some interesting connections with other schools, other departments in the university. So particularly people working on topics like social sciences and law. So the university as a whole, but particularly thanks to our research group, is recognised as a UK government recognised Centre of Excellence for Research, an ACSR. There are about 20 of those universities across the UK that have reached a certain bar which says that their research is large enough and good enough that we can be considered a centre of excellence. So it's a good place to come. And also, actually, our research outputs are measured, our research papers, in a ranking which works for computer science called Computer Science Rankings, by measuring outputs in some of the top conferences. And we're definitely within the top 5 across the whole of Europe for that, and by some measures actually number 1, depending on which group of topics you look at. So we have a sort of particular approach in our group, which is to foster these multidisciplinary collaborations, and I'll mention some of them a little bit later on. But also, as well as going broad, we also go deep. So we look, a lot of our research looks at fundamental topics, so theoretical aspects. So yeah, so you can think of it as being about foundations with applications. So we have some good connections with industry, as well as some industry-sponsored research, the activity that takes place right here or in the building next door. So we're sort of embedding some of our research in current practice as well. And then by being placed in the capital of Scotland, we have a sort of nice ecosystem around us, based in the capital city and some of the activities that are going on in the region, but also within Scotland, and then within the UK, and then internationally as well. I've just got a few photos here of people. I can't introduce you to all of them, but encourage you to look at our web pages, which has connections to each of the people that are mentioned here and their research interests. And when I get to the research topics a little bit later, there'll be some photos. You might have trouble matching the photos to the names. If you have trouble doing that for a particular research area, then you can always email me afterwards. But good to have a look at our list of PhD topic ideas on our web pages anyway. And I just want to give a little bit more of a grounding on what the program is about. So the fundamentals here, perhaps you already know these already, but I just want to give a few thoughts and an aspect on security, privacy and trust. So really, these are problems that cut across nowadays nearly all aspects of how we interact with computers. And we think about privacy to begin with. Sorry, I'm just checking my slides. So privacy is a little bit of sorry, this should have come as a second slide. Let me talk about cybersecurity first, then I'll go back to privacy. So cybersecurity, you might have seen before this traditional CIA triad. So CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These are sort of three most common properties of computer security that more or less everybody learns about when they first take a first computer security course. So confidentiality is about about preventing the unauthorized learning of information. So not just information that should be denied, but you shouldn't be able to actually learn the information by some other means if you're not authorized to do so. Integrity is about the unauthorized, protecting against the unauthorized alteration of data or information. And availability is about maintaining the access to data. So you can see the sort of little graphics there giving you that kind of indication of how those different accesses are denied or should be allowed. And then if we think about privacy, privacy is a little bit, from our point of view, as computer security researchers, we have a particular take on privacy. So privacy is a different property. It's about partial sharing of information between parties. So it's often people think about privacy as necessarily being concerned with personal information, but it might also be about information concerning organizations or groups of individuals. And the essence here is that where some information may be shared, but other information might not be. So for example, I might be happy to reveal to a survey the first half of my postcode address to say roughly which city and which area I live in, but I might not want to reveal all of my postcode because that would narrow down who I am to just a handful of houses, for example. So, so we're seeing the rise of privacy-enhancing technologies nowadays, which help to manage this partial sharing of information in very carefully managed ways. And then if we think about trust, so these are the three parts of our program: security, privacy, and trust. So trust is really something that underlies some of these other properties, because when we're talking about sharing of information and whether sharing of information should be authorized or not, really we've got in the background some idea of being able to decide on a security policy for sharing, and also being able to decide on who participants might be. So having some form of authentication, and then authentication linked to authorization. So you see there are notions of trust and identity which are fundamental. So we call that cyber trust. And then there are two sort of strands to trust that we're particularly investigating at Edinburgh. One is the use of blockchains and distributed ledger technology, which provide new solutions for forming trust as a consensus mechanism. So by some distributed agreement protocols and the use of blockchain. And then another aspect of trust, which we're very interested in, is trust in systems themselves. So trust in software and hardware, and how we can assure that by using techniques like verification of software or verification of hardware devices, and also conveying the fact that some devices may be trusted in a distributed system. So that's known as attestation. So hopefully that gives you a sort of background for what most of the PhD topics are in cybersecurity, privacy, and trust. And then here's a list of some of our specific research themes. So I'll read these through very quickly. There's a bit more in the second half of the talk on some of these themes, but I won't have time to cover them all. So we're looking at topics in AI and security. Certainly, you can read this in both ways. So we have AI systems being applied to cybersecurity. So so that enables new ways of providing security that might be driven to AI. But we also have very important questions about trust in AI and security of AI systems. So we want to know whether AI systems are secure for deployment. Then I mentioned already the distributed notions of security and data science that might be applied, and particularly in the application of blockchains and distributed ledgers. So I mentioned that before. We have a group who work on that, but also work on more general ideas in cryptography. So public public key cryptography, and also a little bit of symmetric key cryptography, but not so much research on that here, but a range of topics within public key cryptography, related techniques. And we have some work on networking and ideas for future networks, including networks of devices, as well as the infrastructure for networking itself. We have work on hardware devices, so looking at things like Internet of Things devices and how do we ensure privacy and security for those devices. We have more general work looking at security and reliability in systems and how we might develop new systems using forms of secure design, and also taking into account new emerging facilities which are being provided by newer hardware that provide new forms of trust, essentially. Then we have strands of work in protocol and program verification. So I mentioned verification already. So we're interested in verification, not just in software itself, but also in the design of security protocols and how one establishes security properties by a sequence of exchanges of messages. And that's an area that's been very rich for computer security research, because very short protocols can be used to establish trust between two parties that may or may not have communicated before, but they can be surprisingly complicated to get right and have subtle flaws in their design, not only in their implementation. Then we have a strand working on quantum computing, and in particular notions of quantum cybersecurity. So I'll say a little bit more about that later, but there's a new CDT program actually in the area of quantum, which would be a good place to apply if you're interested in quantum specifically. And then finally, we have a strand with several researchers working in notions of socio-technical aspects of computer systems and their data. So it's important to recognize that security is not just lying in the technology. It depends on how people interact with technology as well. So that brings in things like human factors as well as the socioeconomic environment too. So things like law and assessment of risk. So let me tell you a little bit now about our PhD program. So hopefully already, if you're watching this talk, you have an idea about what a PhD is. But the basic idea for a PhD is it's a training that you can undertake to become an academic researcher. Okay, it might be something that you undertake because you want to understand a topic very deeply and contribute to research in that area, and that might be the main takeaway for you. It might be something that's very useful for your future employment, but if one of your future ideas is to become an academic researcher, like the group here, then this is also absolutely an essential thing that you need to have before undertaking that career path. So in general, we hope you develop an all-round knowledge of the discipline, and also develop, excuse me a second, there's some noise from outside. Close my window. I'm not sure if you can hear it. But, we hope you develop an all-round knowledge of the discipline. We hope you develop some knowledge in some specific advanced techniques, which will be in your specialist area of study. So a PhD goes very deep on a very specialist topic. But at the same time, we cover a broad range in all of our PhD programs of transferable skills, which will be useful to you more generally. So those are things like the ability to present your work clearly to others and to convey, deep research results, but in more accessible ways, for example. And I would say that there's one overriding requirement that you should have before you consider embarking on any PhD program, and that's to have a passion for your research topic. So we expect you to be, really driven by your interest in the area and wanting to learn more. And that's the most natural thing that we have from, I would say, all of our PhD candidates. So what do you actually do during a PhD? So basically you'll carry out independent research. So the research sometimes can be collaborative, but one of the main requirements to be awarded a PhD is that you have to be able to demonstrate that you've done something yourself. You've made a major contribution yourself, and that's what the result of the PhD will be. So you produce these original contributions to knowledge in the chosen area, and those might be made manifest by writing and publishing academic papers. Sometimes there are other forms of output, including things like results that might get taken forward in industry, and they might be published in other forms. But in general, we do expect publication, and publication of results would happen in academic workshops and conferences usually. So you will work under guidance of PhD supervisors. So, and the particular pattern of supervisors is fairly flexible, but usually there will be at least 2 supervisors, and there may be a co-supervising arrangement or a primary and secondary supervisor. That's really set up during the start of the PhD, and it depends on the topic and the person really. And sometimes, as I mentioned, we have collaborations with industry partners. There are some industry partners who fund some of our PhDs, and there'll be the opportunity to engage with sometimes industrial supervisors who take an interest in PhDs, and sometimes undertake internships, actually spending time with an industrial partner. So the final outcome that you're working towards is a PhD thesis, so a written document that's more or less a book, so quite a substantial piece of work, and then you'll need to defend that PhD thesis in an oral examination, which happens after you've submitted the PhD. And the oral exam for us in the UK is it's not too onerous. It's not a public event. It's a private event that takes part with an internal examiner and an external examiner who are subject experts, who will read your PhD beforehand and then conduct the oral examination asking you questions. So that happens right at the end, but the PhD is always assessed according to regulations that the examiners are asked to consider, and the main requirement there is that there should be a new and significant contribution to knowledge. So you have to be advancing the state of the art. You're not only getting to understand what the state of the art is, but you're pushing forward, you're coming out with new results. And then if that's all successful, you'll get awarded a PhD, a doctoral degree, and then hopefully that will be useful to you in the next stage of your career path, whether it's being an academic or maybe an industrial researcher, or perhaps an engineer, an entrepreneur, a cybersecurity visionary, whatever you may go on to do. Lots of exciting things our previous students have gone on to do. Just to give you an idea about what happens between those 2 stages. So in the first year of PhD study, so it's the program is a 3-year program, I should say. So so there are 3 to 3.5 years of study before you're expected to submit the PhD. So the first year of our program is considered probationary, and this means that you'll be assessed at the end of the year primarily on a thesis proposal and a literature review. So those are 2 documents that you produce along the way during your first year. And those documents should establish that you've got to grips with the research area and you're able to explain the current state of the art. And moreover, you've got a good plan for the remaining time of your PhD to advance that state of the art. So in the first year, you will be starting research anyway, but maybe most of the research will be in the second and third year. So also during the first year, you might have some particular training needs. It might be that you decide that you would need to get a little bit more background in a particular sub area of your PhD. It might be you need to understand a little bit more of a particular mathematical subject, or you want to liaise with people in another school to understand more about social or legal aspects. And those training needs, as well as any sort of transferable skills training that you might want to develop as well. So those will always be offered to you throughout the program, but but it's a good idea during your first year to work with your supervisor to identify opportunities and needs there. So, yeah, and those things might be things like how to do research writing or how to present well, those kind of things. And also, you won't be doing this just on your own and with your supervisor, but you'll be sort of immersed in the research environment of our school, which is really incredibly rich. So because we're such a large department overall, we're the largest in the UK with um, I think getting on for 500 PhD students in total, you'll have plenty of opportunities to go to research seminars, not only seminars in security, privacy and trust, but seminars in other topics that might be relevant. So there might be topics in robotics or in AI, which have security connections that you're interested to attend. And really, there are so many interesting seminars every day. There aren't enough hours for me in the day to go to all the things that I'm interested in, but it's really an amazing opportunity here to engage in that. Then there'll be some specific things which you want to join in on, so certain kinds of graduate lectures that might be useful for you to get that additional background. And then also, depending on your particular PhD topic, there would be the opportunity to go to maybe specific conferences or things like summer schools, which are offered to students internationally, often nationally as part of the ACSR network. There'll be opportunities like this, but also internationally there are good summer schools where you get the chance to meet top researchers from around the world, and we usually support students who'd like to attend those kind of events. Yeah. And the subsequent years after the first year then, so progress through the degree, after you've successfully presented your thesis proposal and had that approved, there'll be progress reports at the end of every subsequent year. So that's managed by the School of Informatics, and then there'll be a similar it's deliberately set up to be a little bit like the oral examinations. So we would have a panel to review both your thesis proposal at the end of the first year and then the progress reports at the end of the second and third year. Your thesis submission will be at the end of the third year, roughly, but it might be after 3.5 years or so. And typically the funding packages work for 3.5 years. And if you want to find out more for information of the format of a PhD at University of Edinburgh, then there's a link you can follow there, and it should be available to you in the slides afterwards. Something about how to apply. So my colleague Daniel Woods is here as the PhD selector for this program. So Daniel, would you like to present this slide?
Yeah, wait, let me close it. Yeah, so my role is to read your applications and assess the quality of the applications, both the research proposal, the CV, and match you with potential supervisors. So what you will need to do is submit, normal things like a CV, some of your transcripts, and for some people, English language certificates. But the main, I guess, difficult creative part is the research proposal. So, to do this, I think the best thing you can do is read through the list of supervisors, see what kind of research areas are interesting, and reach out to those supervisors, because we are not expecting you to formulate a perfect research proposal without speaking to us. And actually, if you speak to a potential supervisor, I actually think there's more chance that you will together find a research topic. So, this is kind of the high level. I would really encourage you to nominate a supervisor on your form, because you can apply without nominating a supervisor by just proposing a topic, and then I will try to match you with the most relevant supervisor. But it's much better if you can nominate that person. And yeah, if for the information on the specific documents you need to send, there's a link here that will help with that. And I think there's one more slide. Yeah, so I guess the main question you guys will have is what funding is available? And I would say there's two routes here. The first route is to get general funding from the school. And the idea there is it's not linked to the topic you propose. Just any kind of computer science topic can be considered for this funding, which is general school funding. To get that funding, you need to apply by the 25th of November for the first round. And I would encourage you to do that. It's not long now, 12 days, but that's where most of that funding can be assigned. And essentially what will happen is your proposal will be compared to not only applications for cybersecurity, privacy, and trust, but also NLP, systems, robotics. So all of the PhD proposals and PhD applicants will be compared, and we will offer funding to the top students. So for that approach, you can propose any project, and the most important thing is the project proposal is strong. That's where I would recommend speaking to a potential supervisor to refine it. And also your profile is strong and it matches that. So that is, the most free way to do it, because you can work on any topic, but that is challenging. Like, there's not so much funding available for that route. The other route you can go down is the UK Centres for Doctoral Training. If you're not familiar with the UK system, this is somehow between a normal UK PhD, which has basically no required training, and the US system where you need to do 2, sometimes 3 years of training. UK CDTs, it's more like 9 months of training. So it's somehow in between. The exams aren't as strict as US qualifying exams. But the UK funding councils have directed more funding towards these CDTs. And the problem, I guess, is we don't right now have a cybersecurity, privacy, and trust CDT. So if you wanted to go down this route, you would have to look at the CDTs that exist. So there's one in natural language processing, there's one in quantum technologies, there's one in machine learning systems, and you would potentially look at a cybersecurity, privacy, trust topic that is linked to those. So something like the cybersecurity implications of quantum technologies would be a good candidate. Maybe the security of natural language processing systems, large language models would be another good system, or how we can apply machine learning to improve cybersecurity. Those kinds of topics could potentially be funded by one of these CDTs. You would have to do this, and it does vary a little bit between the CDTs, but you would have to do some training, some courses. But I did a CDT when I started my PhD, and I actually found the courses really useful because they are, they're often very quick. They're taught often by potential supervisors, so they're much more relevant to the research you will do. And there is more funding available for these CDTs. So if you have interests in quantum, natural language processing, machine learning systems, and there might be a few more, I think there's one related to space. So space cybersecurity is a topic that you might be interested in. Then I would encourage you to look at the CDTs, and there will be a different application cycle. You won't apply to the cybersecurity, privacy, and trust PhD. Instead, you will apply to those CDTs, but you might work with a cybersecurity, privacy, trust faculty member to kind of prepare your application, and with the goal of working with them.
So there's quite a few examples here, and one thing to say is I'm not an expert in all these areas, so I'll explain them as best I can, or just try and give you an impression about them. But if I spark some interest in a particular area, then have a look at our list of PhD topics, and you probably can guess the one most closely connected with the research that I've talked about, and contact the supervisor concerned. And by the way, when you reach out to a potential supervisor, try to be very specific in what you write. Don't just spam lots of people. And if they think they're the wrong person, they would, if it's a nice message, they might refer you on to one of the colleagues who's more suited. So, and I can't cover research of all of our colleagues here. So first of all, let me mention some work in human factors. As I mentioned, this topic area is, dealing with socio-technical aspects of systems. So how can we support people in their use of technology and not blame people for security problems, but have a overall secure environment. And one of our faculty members, our staff members working in this area is Jingji Li. So actually he's got his full contact details here just because he gave this slide in a nice ready to use form. And he's working on topics in user-centric privacy and security, and dealing with things like AI agents. So how can we be sure that AI agents, we might have AI agents that are even sort of somehow agents that are very close to ourselves, maybe with the latest kind of AI technology. So they're acting as us, and even appear to be us. But how can we make sure that they do that in a way that preserves the security and privacy goals that we might have for ourselves? Not revealing. They might know a lot of information about us, an online avatar or agent that acts as us, but we might not want them to reveal too much. So that's an important topic, and looking at that link between users and technology and how we design for both privacy and security at once. Another area is in trust, and there we're looking at work in database technologies and in programming languages and techniques for managing the flow of data through systems. So understanding where data has come from is often very important to defining trust. So if we want to have trust in some data set, for example, that's being used for training an AI model, we might want to know where all the pieces have come from and be sure that we trust the sources of all the different pieces that go together to make up a large data set. So being certain of the data's accuracy as well as knowing where it's come from, if we can. So there are some quite deep theoretical techniques and methods for doing that. I mean, the program at the top looks a bit basic, but the idea is if you have a much more sophisticated function that might compute with a bunch of inputs, how can you track the data that might be computed? So if you sum two numbers together, you have the provenance comes from the combined provenance comes from the two sources individually. So it's related to problems that have been studied for a long time in computer security of information flow, but goes a little bit further. And then there are interesting questions also on the sort of flip side. So if we have systems that change the nature of computing to track where information has come from in this format, then that can be useful so that we can find out provenance, but it also can introduce new privacy problems because it might be that we track too much. So how can we measure that kind of thing? Another aspect of trust, this is an older project, but quite interesting, I think, is one that was conducted together with design informatics here, so a group that works on design in the School of Art in Edinburgh. And here the idea was to actually try to monitor the circular economy and understand how value is maintained by reuse and recycling and reselling goods. So that's more to do with aspects of trust and aspects of information flow and digital traceability, which can have security as well as privacy implications. Another project with the School of Design, which is nice to talk about, was a coffee machine that was equipped with a Bitcoin interface so that you could purchase your coffee with Bitcoin. This was very early in the days of seeing any kind of Bitcoin interfaces for physical devices, but the interesting aspects here was not so much that we could put a device onto a coffee machine and pay by Bitcoin, but actually that it enabled tracing enabling some new forms of choice. So we could give people a choice of the beans that they might choose, and then a particular coffee machine might become more adapted to ordering beans from one place over another according to users' choice. And those choices could be related to ethical decisions about the beans that were being purchased, or flavor decisions, those kind of things. Different topic area, verification and modeling. How do we know for certain that the technologies we create are secure? What does secure even mean? So there I mentioned in the first part that we've had a lot of work in this area in the foundations for program and protocol verification. So designing formal logics that you use to reason about programming languages, but also reason about protocols, and then verifying the proofs. So often cryptographers work on handwritten proofs. So they're like dense mathematical arguments, and those are fine, but sometimes they can have mistakes in them. So converting those handwritten proofs into proof on machine makes the proof a little bit more robust and testable, and also allows us to test changes. So if you have a very long mathematical proof, it's quite difficult to assess the impact of every single assumption in the proof. But once we have these mechanized proofs, that becomes enabled. So some of our group are looking at tools and techniques for doing that. Yeah. One topic area that I've worked in is the use of modeling systems, so describing systems abstractly, and then verifying aspects of the design. And we've done that for notions of security for mobile apps and app stores. And we've also been doing that for looking at interactions between models for safety and security of systems. And we're looking at safety. I'm looking with a new PhD student starting this year at interactions between security and privacy on sort of risk-based graphical models. So if you've seen an attack tree, the picture there on the bottom right will be familiar, as well as verifying AI systems, which I'll say something more about. Here's a little picture just to show you, give you a sort of hint of what was going on in some of that earlier research. So one of the mobile applications that's types of mobile application that's been really had a bad reputation in the world, the Android world, has been a whole series of flashlight applications which are designed to just turn on the lights on the phone so that you could see. And back in the old days, lots of these applications were distributed to many users, and they did turn on the lights, but they also had a lot of other behavior, which was sometimes stealing people's personal information. And by doing some program analysis of the applications, we were able to look at the application there, and you see on the right, there's an enormous amount of code to do with advertising, but actually the functional behavior of the flashlight is very small in there. So so it's quite interesting to be able to take apart applications or even malicious code and understand it in that way, and try and see where insecure actions may take place. Yeah, quantum cybersecurity, as I mentioned, is a subtopic within our quantum group, and I won't say much more about that because there has been a separate briefing for the quantum informatics CDT. So have a look at that briefing, or ask Kasia to send you a link if you weren't at that briefing to find out more. But there's a lot of interesting work there. So basically in the applications of quantum computing, more specifically to security problems, and even the way that even having some little quantum element somewhere on the network can enable better security properties by making use of that element. So it doesn't mean that we all need to have quantum computers on our desk, but there might be just some quantum interaction, some quantum cloud elements. So that's quite exciting, and a lot of research funding being put into that in the UK. We've also got a long-lived strand of work on e-voting, which is coming out of the cryptography group there, and a bunch of techniques and protocols for conducting voting electronically that sometimes, you know, they provide at least as good guarantees as you would hope from physical voting with pencil and paper, but actually some more properties can be guaranteed as well, which is one of the appealing things. So sometimes there's horror stories about e-voting maybe going wrong, but actually it has the potential to do better than current voting, which is quite exciting. So you're able to actually check whether your vote has been counted, for example, through clever techniques. We've also looked at verifying the security of hardware Bitcoin wallets. That's been a nice piece of work by Mirto there. And Yeah, and in general, privacy enhancing technologies. So we've got several researchers who are working on privacy enhancing technologies. How do we enable people, organizations, even governments to protect privacy? Um, and well, there's been lots of examples where I mean, this is a very difficult problem. This is just a slide to sort of suggest the problem. There's an infamous case where organizations, or several cases on this slide, where organizations have released data for the purpose of data science research, and then only realized later that the data is subject to linkability attacks. So one data set can be connected to another data set and then reveal information that the people releasing the data didn't expect. So one of the first big examples of that was Netflix, that released anonymized viewing data, and then researchers connected that to data sets that were publicly available from crawling IMDb, and they were able to de-anonymize some of the data, which is pretty scary, you know. So that's a fundamental problem. And then there are anonymity networks like the Tor network, which are designed to preserve anonymity in browsing or navigating the web. And we've got researchers who look into the properties there to make sure that Tor does what it should do and doesn't leak more information than it should. So quite a lot of ongoing work, even though Tor is, you know, deployed and in use. Another aspect is statistical models for security and privacy, and how much information is necessarily revealed when we do release some statistical information, and how can we add noise in a way that doesn't reveal too much. So new privacy definitions. We also have a strand of work, and I expect this is going to increase over the coming years, in responsible AI and AI for privacy, and we're probably going to see more overlap between computer security researchers and researchers who are working on responsible and safe AI. But Nadine is one of our team there who's working on pets and other techniques to make sure that AI systems are deployed in responsible ways and also built and trained in ways that preserve the privacy of people involved. I've mentioned already the work on blockchain and distributed ledger. That's quite a significant subgroup within our group, and we have a strong connection with industry there. So we have an embedded industry working on properties of blockchain and looking at future distributed technologies for the cloud, like multi-party computation and fully homomorphic encryption. So that's quite exciting. And then in hardware and networks, we have work on AI for security and security of AI, and I've been working there on some techniques for looking at anomaly detection for deciding if intruders might be breaking into a network. And similar on the other side is some work on verification of AI systems using a tool that we've developed in a project in the last few years. Actually, that's quite exciting. There's also work on things like Fitbit devices, or well, this is older work now, but in general, we're still interested in these kind of problems with hardware security of devices and devices at the end and the edges of networks, and how those can be integrated with mechanisms for attestation, or just doing the best that we can if we don't have full trust on remote devices. That's quite an interesting one. We have a large project on rigorous engineering for secure and trustworthy systems that I don't have time to go into, but it's supported by a lot of work in the UK. And then finally, and this is some slides from Daniel, actually, Daniel, but I'll just talk to them quickly. We have this important question of law and public policy, so defining the rules and how they should be interpreted. So there are interesting questions because of different jurisdictions, how applications have to behave differently in different places. And Daniel's area more generally is answering questions about managing cybersecurity and risk, and how those are modeled and dealt with. I'm afraid we're out of time, so I have to wrap up now. And if you have any lingering questions, then there are pages. Yeah, so for next steps, you might need to like to look at these pages here for virtual visits of the city or chatting to students. And then for follow-up questions, as Katia mentioned at the beginning, there's a general email, futurestudents@ed.ad.uk, or you're welcome to write to me directly if you'd like. So I guess Future Students has the advantage that it'll maybe anonymize your questions if they're passed on to us, but for that you pay for the delay in passing on the questions. So but some of the questions might be better handled by the central admissions rather than our course team. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much for your attention.